Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome, brothers and sisters. Peace and blessings be with you. This is Ihsan. I've recently begun reading David Goggins' new book, Never Finished. Now, I really enjoyed his first book, Can't Hurt Me. I highly recommend it. Huge warning that there is very strong language in all of his content and including in his book. But his first book, Can't Hurt Me, was excellent. It was extremely powerful to see what this man has gone through, what he's had to overcome to become who he is, right? One of the strongest, one of the toughest men alive. So that first book, Can't Hurt Me, phenomenal, excellent. I'm not so sure about the second book. I've only just a few chapters into it so far. And there is value in it, but there's also a lot of unresolved still trauma that he focuses on. And this is the part that I have a little bit of a problem with. There's a lot of issues with regards to his family and lineage. There's a lot of focus on it. And some of it, I think, his perspective, his narrative, his story, and his choice in regards to this may not be the healthiest. But one of the things that he talks about very early on in the book is this idea of distracting injuries. So one of the things that I've learned about David Goggins is that he was an EMT, or he is trained as an EMT professional as well, an emergency medical response professional who deals with emergency situations, right? Life-critical emergency situations when it comes to injuries and health. And so as a first responder, he gets to see all types of traumas, all types of injuries. And they have this idea, this concept of distracting injuries, which are basically when they respond to an emergency, a human being may be so wounded that they're in critical condition, that if they don't get appropriate medical treatment right away, they could very easily die. But that there are distracting injuries. Those are the injuries that are most apparent, that are the most obvious. And for someone who's not a professional and who has not had enough experience, they may focus on the distracting injury. Whereas there might be something even more severe going on that isn't as apparent. For example, there could be internal bleeding, there could be a punctured lung, right? Any of these things that if it's not dealt with immediately, they will die, even though they have an apparent distracting injury, something that is very physically obvious, visually obvious. So he talks about this concept as it relates to other areas of our lives. And this is what I wanted to focus on. Because we as human beings, as a result of trauma, as a result of hardship, as a result of suffering, as a result of pain, perhaps as a result of experienced abuse, we all have what may be called distracting injuries that we tend to focus on while the life-critical conditions that we should be focusing on continue to get worse. So these distracting injuries, the pain, the suffering, the sorrow, the sadness, the regret, the remorse, the anger, the resentment, right? The rage that comes from that. All of these psychological experiences as a result of our story, in effect, become distracting injuries that keep us from functioning in life here and now and dealing with the very real things that we need to deal with so that we can actually progress. We have to remember that healing can only take place in the present. And once we correct the present, once we deal with whatever it is that we need to deal with that is an imbalance or an inadequacy in our lives, once we deal with that here and now, once we fix that, once we correct that, once we heal that, once we progress, once we make the very real changes that are necessary, it automatically corrects and heals the past. But the trap is that we get stuck in the past. We get stuck in the stories. We get stuck in the narrative. We get stuck in these distracting injuries of what somebody did or didn't do, how we were wronged, how we were oppressed, how we were abused, how we were hurt. These are distracting injuries that if we invest in, continue to plague, handicap, and cripple our lives from ever changing, from ever improving. It keeps us from moving forward. We, in effect, become stuck. So when we have these distracting injuries, these distracting psychological injuries, traumas in effect, that we continue to narrate, that we continue to focus on, that we continue to complain about, that we continue to ruminate over, it keeps us stuck. It prevents progress. It prevents healing. It prevents correction. It prevents progress so that we can actually get beyond the past. And so in this way, we keep perpetuating the past, not just into the present, but also then into the future. What we have to do as human beings, particularly as people of faith and as believers, is to learn to let go. To learn to let go of these distracting injuries and focus on the present. Focus on the change that is necessary here and now in the present so that we don't perish as a result of these distracting injuries, which are not imminently life-critical. Whereas there may be very real life-critical conditions, circumstances, challenges that we have to deal with, that we have to address. Could be issues of health, It could be issues of money, career, business. It could be issues in marriage and relationships. We've got to learn to let go of these distracting injuries. We've got to, first of all, become aware of these distracting injuries as what they are, learn to let go of them, and to deal with the present, to do what is necessary in the present to move forward. This is the problem when we focus on the past. When we cannot let go of the past, it gets perpetuated into the future. And also why forgiveness is so important, such an important pillar and principle in faith, in religion, in spirituality, and in particular in Islam. If we don't learn to let go, if we don't learn to forgive and just move forward, we remain stuck. And the truth is, when we continue to live and operate with so much resentment and anger towards other people, very often we are distorting reality. We forget our part in the story and in the roles that we've played that led to the circumstances, conditions, challenges that we ended up facing or are facing. It's a very irresponsible way to live. And this is again why victim consciousness is so dangerous. It is destructive, it is toxic, not just to others, but to ourselves. So in effect, trauma, right? Traumas, things that happen in the past, and you got to remember that we have traumas that we may not even be aware of. We may not even be able to remember because we were too young, or that even predate our time on earth, that we have inherited. Traumas are distracting injuries, and we've got to deal with them in the present by becoming present, by tuning into how we feel here and now. That lets us know what we're dealing with, what our soul is trying to process or deal with, instead of continually distracting ourselves with entertainment, with addictions, right, with distractions. We've got to become present. We've got to learn to face ourselves inwardly, shine the light, the spotlight inwardly, deal with whatever it is that we have to deal with, and learn to let it go so that we can move forward. So as I'm reading this book, I wanted to share with you guys this idea. I thought it was particularly valuable. This idea that Goggins shares about distracting injuries. Now, what can we do practically? Well, one of the most important things we can do, and this is what I recommend always to my clients and to members of our community, to become aware of your feelings. Your feelings will always let you know what your mind is thinking, unconsciously or subconsciously. So as you become aware of your feelings, you'll become aware of your thoughts, you become aware of your beliefs, and then you can deal with them. You can look at them, you can shine the light of consciousness onto them, and then heal them, correct them, cure them, transcend them with the light of truth. As I've been on the path, right, for now over 20 years, I've increasingly become aware of the importance of having to deal with traumas. And this is why I created the course in spiritual healing, as a means, as a method to become aware of the traumas that we all carry, because this then becomes our path to spiritual development. We all have injuries, we all have wounds, and again, the core of these predate our existence on earth. In fact, one of the things that I share in the course in spiritual healing is that the most fundamental and primordial trauma that we all experience is the trauma of separation from the divine presence of Allah in the fall from grace, in the fall from the garden. We all carry the memory of that. It's in our cells, it's in our psyche. It has been passed down throughout the millennia, throughout the generations of human beings. And we all carry this primordial wound, right? And that then gets triggered and activated every time we become triggered, every time we become hurt, every time we experience abandonment or rejection. It is that ancient wound that gets triggered. Again, I talk about this in much more detail in the course in spiritual healing, and I'll include a link to that in the description below this video. For those of you who realize that you're at a point where you want to start dealing with the traumas that may be holding you back, here's the other thing. If we don't deal with ourselves, if we don't deal with our traumas, we continue to relive them. They will continue to manifest in our lives until we look at them, until we face them, until we deal with them, until we learn to transcend them, until we learn to heal them. And if we don't learn to heal the wounds, the hurts, the trauma, the pain within us, we end up passing these on to our children. They unfortunately become the unwitting recipients of our suffering, of our stories, of our narratives, of our victimhood. And this then, of course, affects their lives. This is why the Prophet ﷺ said that paradise is at the foot of the mother, right? Because the mother has the most influence over the child's early experience. And not just the mother and the father. We've got to deal with our traumas, our hurts, our wounds ourselves. We've got to become whole spiritually so that we can pass on peace to our children. Remember that we cannot give anything that we do not have. So even though paradise is at the foot of the mother, and again, not to take away anything from the role of the father as well, extremely important, we cannot give what we don't have. If the children are going to inherit peace, which is a core experience of the paradise that the Prophet ﷺ spoke about, the mother, the father has to have these. We've got to be able to pass this on. We've got to be able to transmit this. This then literally becomes the inheritance of our children. Our states, our conditions are what our children will inherit. This is one of the things I realized as well early on, once I became a father, that there are things that we may not do for ourselves. There are things that we may not want to deal with for ourselves when it comes to our own development and our spiritual maturation. But when you realize that you've got to deal with it, not just for yourself, but for your children as well, that then becomes enough leverage. That becomes important enough now to deal with it, to develop spiritually, to develop personally, to heal, to correct, to balance, to become successful, to become healthy yourself for the sake of your children. Remember, brothers and sisters, that the most important investment we can make of our time, our focus, our energy, our money is in ourselves, in the healing, in the development, in the awakening of ourselves. This is the most important investment we can make. And we shouldn't shy away from investing time, energy, money, whatever it takes for our own development. There's nothing more important. It's more important than the latest model of smartphone that comes out, the latest iPhone. It's more important than music and entertainment and food and lavish dinners. There's so many things that we spend our time, energy, focus, money, attention on that are not doing us any good, that are doing us, in fact, a disservice by continuing to keep us distracted from what we actually do need to do, which is to look inward, to deal with ourselves, to heal our relationship with our Creator. Again, I'll put some links in the description below this video for some access to resources that can be of benefit to you, especially for those of you who are coming across my content for the first time. Take a look and take advantage. And I pray that Allah Almighty, subhanahu wa ta'ala, supports you, guides you, strengthens you, sustains you with His light, with His love, with His mercy, and that He firmly establishes us all upon the path that leads to His pleasure and our success, to divine and eternal success. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.